Hi everyone, James here from F9 and welcome to F9 Starlite. This has been a good couple of months in the making and it is another one of our infamous STEM-based releases, very similar to F9 Electric Funk and Disco Nuggets. We're always looking to move things forward at F9, so with this release, we took it up to an SSL room in London called West Point Studios. West Point not only has a fantastic SL4000 G Series 48-channel console, but an incredible collection of outboard that we were able to utilize heavily during the pre-mixing of this pack. Now, this allows us to wind some of that infamous desk grunt into the material, and that is perfectly evident, hopefully, on the audio demos. But let's not waste any more time with me talking about it. Let me show you around this pack and also how I created some of these audio demos. This is a big zip file, so please only try to decompress it using either the Mac OS X archive utility or Windows Explorer. Some of the older zip apps will not handle big zips properly, and this will unpack as an 11GB file. The reason why these tools are the best is that Apple and Microsoft keep them permanently updated. And this is what you get. Now, for a start, please actually sort this by name. We've used numbers throughout all of the naming of these files here to keep everything nice and straightforward. You'll see the first folder here are the individual stem sets. Opening this up, you can see all 15 of the projects, and they all have their BPM and key information on there. Second folder contains all of the different drum loops sorted by drum type. Now, there is more content in these folders than were actually used in the stems and in the loops. That is the joy of having this format. We were constantly adding to it right up to the last minute, so do check all of these loops out. Folder number 3, music loops. Sorted by different types, so we've got bass loops, key loops, synth loops, music loops, which we'll come to in detail later on. There's some real magic in here. Brass and string, guitar loops, and Vox loops. And all of these are then replicated as Apple loops that you can just dump straight into Logic. Folder number 5, drum and effects sounds. All the usual suspects are in here, but we've really carefully edited these. They've all gone through things like Isotopes, RX, or the Acoustica editor. So you're not going to find any air in front of these. These are beautifully edited. We've also carried forward the technology we were using with F9 Kick. So we've separated the kick drums, as well as them appearing here as normal, we've separated them into transient and body portions. So this really contains all the tonal information, and the transient contains the noise information, which is actually the click at the front of it. And that means you can mix and match these up. If you're not sure what we're talking about, please go and have a look at the F9 Kick videos, which I'll link to in the descriptions. We've got a few bonus transients here that we were able to pull out of this part of the drum loop collection, the mixed drum loops. We'll explain what we mean by that a little bit later on. And then we come to the sound menu patches. Now, basically what we did is we took every stem and every loop and we went down to a granular level and created a whole ton of one-shots. Then we turned those one-shots into sound menus, spread them out across a keyboard, and that's what you've got here. They're available for Ableton, Bitwig devices, Contact. It does require a full install of Contact. This won't work with a Contact player. There's also a Logic folder with all of those chops set up as sampler instruments and Logic patches, an MPC expansion containing all of these sound menus, and a pack library for the free Halion Sonic SE. And all of this comes with a full 62-page manual. I'm really proud of our manuals. I think we're the only sample manufacturer that goes to this level of detail. We're going to start in Logic, but obviously this can be done in any DAW. I'm going to open the first stem set called Manifique. I'm going to check the tempo 126, so change the DAW tempo. I'm going to pick up all of the stems and just drag them onto the arrange page. Create new tracks. There we go. Everything's now in place. So that's just the first of the stem sets. That's called Manifique. And as you can see, it builds. It's got different changes and different parts in there. Just a quick word on the leveling. As you can see from this level meter that we've put here on Logic, everything is under control. Everything is at a really nice operating level and it has headroom built into it. Now, please don't forget that you effectively have a blank drum production in each one of these too. If we just mute all of the music, here's the drums. So this is also like a mini version of our drum tracks range. We've also made sure that none of these are over processed. So that means you can add a little bit of sweetening. So let's just tickle the tops and the bottoms and apply some compression and playback. So just 2 plugins from Logic there can make such a massive difference on the sweetening, and that is down to the quality of mixing and production within these stem sets. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that so many sample packs have the audio absolutely smashed to pieces in a way that makes most of the content pretty much unusable. It may sound great in isolation, but it doesn't come together. And this is another reason for the contents of this pack being formatted in this manner. If you think about it, these stems provide you with 15 reference points of how a multi-channeled production should come together before it hits a mastering chain. That's immensely powerful, and we have not held back on this at all. Okay, let's import a stem set inside of Ableton. This one is called Roundhouse. It's 125 BPM, so let's set the tempo correctly. But before I actually go to drag the stems in, this is a new install of Ableton, and it will default normally. If you go into the preferences and click on the Record, Warp and Launch tab, it will default with Auto Warp Long Samples on. You want to turn that off, then it's not going to apply any time stretching, because otherwise it will just guess the tempos of these files. So we're going to select them all in, bring them into the Arrange page, and I'm going to hold down one of the function keys on the computer. That differs between Mac and PC, but it allows you to drop the stems in one underneath the other. Now we can just play back. So now we have them all imported, I can actually select all of the different regions, and then we can apply warp. Now, nearly all DAWs have different warp modes, so what I tend to do is put all of the drums on either beats or rhythm modes, and all of the music, put them on the polyphonic modes or the complex modes. Now, just one note on this, pretty much all of the DAWs use the same processing now. It's Z-Plane's Elastic Pro Audio. So now I can drop the tempo to, say, 120. So that's always the best way to work with stems and time stretching. Put them in with the tempo set correctly, turn all of the time stretching off as you do so, then apply the time stretching from your DAW, and it will then give you a free rein with the tempo. And here's the same process inside of Bitwig. Come to the settings, go to the behavior tab, on where it says long samples, select raw. That will import the audio without any time stretch being applied. And to show you the extremes of that process, that's exactly what I've done here. I've imported the plateau stems at the correct stem set tempo, which was 125, then applied the time stretch, and now I can even run a tempo ramp. So this part here is dropping from 126 BPM all the way down to 67. That is pretty incredible, and it shows you the power of the Z-Plane technology that is now built in pretty much, I would say, to every main DAW. Now, one really important note on the naming conventions. We've shortened the names of all of the different projects and written them into all of the file names. So this set of stems is from the Funk Francaise, and we've reduced that down to F9. There's a very good reason. If you ever want to search for any of the loops, you can just search for that abbreviated name. So if I come up here and type in F9, then you look in the drums, you will find the claps, the kick loops, the snares for that particular project. And the same goes for all of the music. So if we search for F9, here's the bass parts. And that also holds true for the MIDI files. But a quick note on that, let me just get rid of that search. With the MIDI files for this release, there are two folders internally. One is sorted by instrument, but also we've duplicated a different folder structure and organized them by project. So it's a very simple little idea, but it's ever so useful when you're searching for things and for inspiration. Let me just play you back the two main parts of this project quickly. Now you can hear there's two musical themes working here, and wherever possible within the stem sets we've tried to do that, or where we think it's appropriate. But please also go and search for the project's title in the music loops folder, because sometimes you'll find extra little bits like this. There's some fantastic extras in that music loops folder, so please go and check it out. And as you can hear, filter, phasing and flanging is the order of the day here. So let me start introducing you to some of the gear we've used. This is the Akai Professional MFC42 analog filter module. Not only is it got dual analog filters, but it's got this fantastic phase shifter on it that we've used intensely throughout the pack. Here it is in action on a little A minor loop. And for me, those constant modulations is one of the things that made French House so unique. Because a lot of these things were mixed with hardware effects, that modulation is constant and it's never being repeated as we would inside the DAW. And that to me is why you get so much soul in some of this music. Now, of course, we can't have a conversation about French House sounds and processing without talking about vintage samplers. 12-bit samplers seem to really have a magic in this kind of music, and this has been one of our favourites, the Akai S612. It'll only hold one sample at any one point. It can just about hold a bar of house music, but it's amazing when you have it modded, as this one is. Here's one bar from this pack inside this machine playing back. It does actually have a fantastic analog filter. This is what it sounds like. But Akai were very clever. They were hiding the top-end aliasing that was present in the actual sampling and playback process using that filter. This machine has been modded to bypass that. You hear that crunch at the top. It's just instantly emotive of that sound and that era. And we've used this heavily throughout this pack. It will only sample in mono. So what we ended up doing was sampling the left channel first, then the right-hand channel, and placing them back together. Now, you might think that that's never going to work, but trust me, it does. And you get this fantastically fat stereo image out of it and all of this stereo crispiness on the top. Now, here's a perfect example of that in action. This is the title track from the pack. And running underneath it is this loop of crushed music. As you can hear there, a nice filter gets applied, adding some variation and some movement into that part. And dissecting these and finding out all the little moves that we've made in each individual stem will give you a ton of production ideas for your own music. And in fact, let's use this stem set to show you the level of separation. Obviously, you've got all of the drums and effects. With all the main parts there separated out. Basses. You've heard the crushed music. We've also got a live Fender Rhodes on nearly every track. As well as some fantastic string and brass parts. Guitars. Keyboards. And some very tastefully produced extras. And as we mentioned earlier, as many MIDI files as we could find for each project are available. And actually, some of these include parts that didn't actually make it to the final cut, but we thought might be useful for you guys. I was really keen with the audio demos to show you different use scenarios for this pack. And here's the first part of the main audio demo that you will have hopefully now already heard. Now, I've attacked this as I would any main production and as you would. In other words, you're using all of your plugin arsenal and the rest of it. The great thing is here, I can show you a ton of plugins that I've discovered recently that are fantastic. And the first one is just on this opening segment. This was actually a resample piece of music that had been through the Akai 612. And the filtering is coming from this fantastic plugin. This is the P565 Siren by Pulsar Modular. Pulsar Modular are an extraordinary company. Their stuff is not cheap, but for very, very good reasons. A ton of work has really gone into making these things sound authentically analog. This is an incredibly smooth filter. So I've then used 3 stems and applied an awful lot of filtering to it. So I've just used some simple bar chop repeats there, and right at the end, what I've done is taken all of them and what I've done on that last bar is taken all of them there, and instead of having a fade out, I've selected a slow down, and that will give you that tape stop effect. But you hear that bit crushing in the background. This I actually have set up on an auxiliary setting. So if I take the summing folder for all of these parts, you can see the 565 filter on there. Now, here's an excellent, really cheap little plugin I found from Purify. This is a micro limiter plugin, and it emulates the old Alesis micro limiter hardware device that was infamous for really slamming things hard. And you can see it pumping away here. But you hear that digital fizzing in the background? That's our auxiliary sensor. Let's check that out now. First up is a pretty serious bit crusher down to 10-bit, bringing the sample rate right down. Then we've got quite an extreme filter that's taking off the bottom and some of the top. That's often what you want to do directly after bit crushing, is just filter down some of the new frequencies that are created. Then I'm using phases from Native Instruments, touch of overdrive. I'm then using Softtube's excellent mutator plugin to give it some stereo action. Soothe 2 is then applied just to get rid of some of the frequencies that get right on your nerves. There's some balancing EQ, and then we've got a sidechain compressor, basically. Now, if I were to solo just that, you'll hear what's going on. And let me show you the difference it makes to that part if I mute it on and off. And this is a perfect example as to why I wanted to keep on adding audio files to the zip file as we were building these audio demos, because tons of useful parts like that came out. For example, here's another little filtered part that I put together using the S612. All of this stuff was added to the zip file as we went in. And here's an interesting little arrangement stutter right at the end of this, banging into the whole production. And one thing I really want to show you are these tiny little gaps that I've added at the end of these repeat sections. You see it goes bang, 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 but then you've got this really small little gap where everything stops just before it hammers back in. There's another one a little bit further on in the arrangement. And those tiny little gaps, I believe someone once described them as all-star drops, that you can just add a little bit of extra punch to the next section that's coming in. So sometimes it's not about what you're actually adding. It's when you have these micro moments where everything disappears and then bang, you're straight back in. That is dynamics in action. And now we've reached this section, we have to talk about these vocals. Believe it or not, these do not come from a vocoder.
Working my fingers to the bone.
There's a chordal version of that underneath.
Working my fingers to the bone.
And some additional solo lower notes here.
Work it, work it, work it, work it, work it.
So even though they sound like a vocoder, they're actually not. They're from this piece of, quite frankly, amazing technology from Roland. This is the VP9000, and it was released towards the end of the 90s. It has 3 controls on it, and as you can see, you can independently control the pitch, the time, and the formant of certain sounds. But if it is a solo voice, you can then turn this mode on, robot. You can then come over here and select either between polyphonic, in other words, play chords, or solo playback. And when you turn legato on, as well as the solo mode, that's how you get this style of performance.
Working my fingers to the bone.
Now, in my opinion, this amazing device was marketed completely wrong, and therefore not many people know about it. But for those of us in the 90s that did know, we did some fantastic stuff with it. And if you ever see one really cheap, just grab it. Learn it, you'll get some amazing results out of it. This technology was also added to the V-Synth GT, and Russell and I hammered this thing. We absolutely loved it throughout the end of the Freemasons years. And here's another example of finding just a little bit of it and using it as an arpeggio. So let's have a look at this part of the audio demo I put together using the verdict stems. Now these are actually quite slow, they're at 114, but I wanted to start it with a house beat at about 125. So it goes from this. And then we will go through a tempo fall into the main part of the stems. Now, just before I break that down and show you all of the parts, I just want to talk about this incredible compressor. This is the Eventide Omnipressor, and I'm going to be honest, I consider it a bit of a secret weapon. It was basically the hardware unit that this is based on was designed by the beginnings of the Eventide company with the mindset of what happens if we make a compressor an effect. So it can actually go up to negative ratios here, but it's immensely bitey, and for me it works brilliantly as a bus compressor when you need that over compressed sound, which obviously this style of music is famous for. If you want to try it out, go and grab the demo, and always keep an eye on Eventide for their sales. They're quite a big company. They run hardware as well, so they're always having sales, and if you ever see this cheap and you get on with it, grab it. What I tend to do is I open the attack time right up, bring the release time right down, and then tweak that threshold pretty high for a mix, and then run this at about 1.45. It really does start to get extreme if you go too much higher. Luckily, you've got a mix control here, but that is one of the things that is helping to bring all of this stuff together in that kind of seriously squashed, glued French style. Another thing I find very useful is upward compressors, and here I'm using the Waves Max Volume. And I'm using this section, the low-level section, which is effectively like an upwards compressor to smash everything upwards. So let me just show you if I turn that part of the processing off. So as you can hear, it just sucks everything up together. And that was very similar, in my opinion, to things like the Alesis 3630 compressors that were infamously used by pretty much all of the French house producers, but in a much more controlled manner. So now let's break this front section down. And I've got a heavily edited version of the main bass from Verdict that's been time stretched to this house tempo. And it filters up a bit later on. On top of that, I've got one of the Verdict phase loops. And that's a sample inside of the VP9000 with the time parameter turned all the way down, so it's really heavily stretching, and then it's been phased. The house drums underneath this are actually put together using a composite part of loops and one-shot menus. Here's a 12-bit kick. Some really nice and tight modern claps. We've dived quite a lot into the drum loop selection for this. But we've also got MIDI information here, and that is triggering this plugin, Halion Sonic SE3. Halion Sonic SE is totally free from Steinberg. There's actually a newer version knocking around now, and you can install it on any system that supports a VST, and I believe even AUs as well. So let me just explain what we've done with all of these one-shots. Basically, we went through every single piece of audio within the stems and the loops and cut them into one-shot hits, whether that be drums or whether that be music parts, chords, little mini riffs, etc., etc. There's 1,800, there's more than 1,800 in fact, laid out across a MIDI keyboard. So in other words, one sample for every single key. Now I want to show you this on Halion Sonic SE because any DAW user can go and grab this, so it makes it easier to explain. Also, we've got some tasty functions here. Now, I do just want to bring your attention down here to this little button that you can turn on and off. It is a bypass for the bit crusher that is controlled by this bits and sample rate. And the reason being is that it will affect the audio no matter what the settings. So being able to bypass it is incredibly useful if you just want these clean. Let's turn the bypass off. And this is the snare menu. On the Halion interface, we've got a transient control, an excellent drive. Hear how it gets darker as it fattens things right up there. Delays and reverb, as well as filters. But obviously it's not just drums, it's the musical parts too. And here we've got one patch called All Music Chops in F sharp minor, which is what this key is. And you'll notice a few more controls have turned up here, and the most significant one is this one, stretch. Let me just open that filter up so you can hear it, and I've just set the stretch back to normal. If I turn it to the left slowly, it will slow down as I play it. And speed up without changing the pitch as I turn it to the right. So it's great fun for just developing these weird little noises that you need for all this stuff. We've added a similar functionality to the Contact version of this library as well. And of course, these are also available in an MPC format, including MPC Beats, and for native samplers inside of Logic and Ableton and Bitwig. And I've used some of these patches to great effect just for some additions for this house production at the front. And over the top, I've got some automated parts. But I think I'm actually going to need to do a separate video showing you the power of all of these chops, because this video is getting very long and it's an immense collection at 1,800, more than 1,800 one-shots. So you can see them in action against the normal stem audio from this pack. Let's have another just quick listen to this. But one little tip here, do check out this folder, Mixed Drum Loops, inside the Drum and Effects Loops folder. It's got all sorts of wonderful things like this in it. And this. And when you piece them together with the individual sounds, because within this folder you just get tons of wonderfulness. And on here you can hear all of that processing that we've talked about coming together. You hear the crunch of all those digital samplers in there, and then that fantastic punch that is added to this by splitting all of this stuff out on an SSL up in West Point. Because up there we were able to do some extraordinary things like run this Fairchild clone in parallel from Desk Sends, have it coming up on its own channel. So you're pumping in all sorts of parallel compression and loveliness. This, in my opinion, is an absolute goldmine, just this one folder here. And if you do get this pack, I highly recommend you check everything out. So that's it for this walkthrough for F9 Starlight. I've got to say the production process here has been utterly joyous. Being able to split stuff out on an SSL again, a desk that I know so well and worked on for many, many years, really inspired me and made me realize that if we're not careful, we're going to lose some of those rooms, and we need to kind of keep them going. We will be doing this kind of thing again, and we've also got some excellent alternate options, including someone who's installed a beautiful vintage Neve console just locally in Brighton. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new to this channel, because we're always dropping a ton of free information. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Wow.